You know what's interesting? Some of the people who have the strongest effect on others are completely unaware of it. They wake up, look in the mirror, notice every flaw, criticize themselves, and walk out the door convinced they're just another ordinary person. Meanwhile, someone remembers the way they smiled yesterday. Someone else is hoping they'll show up at work again. Another person is still replaying a conversation they had with them a week ago. Isn't that strange? We spend so much time judging ourselves that we rarely stop to ask a simple question. What if other people experience us very differently than we experience ourselves? Carl Jung believed that the unconscious notices things long before the conscious mind understands them. While we're busy analyzing appearances, the deeper mind is responding to something else entirely. It responds to authenticity, emotional presence, and the quiet signals we send without realizing it. That's why attraction is so mysterious. Sometimes it has very little to do with perfect looks and everything to do with the way another person feels in your presence. Today, we're exploring 4 signs that suggest you may be far more attractive than you've ever believed. And these aren't the kind of signs you'll find in a fashion magazine. They're psychological, they're subtle, and once you understand them, you may never look at yourself, or the people around you, the same way again. Let's begin with something almost everyone has experienced but very few people understand. Have you ever looked up and caught someone staring at you? The moment your eyes met, they immediately looked somewhere else. Maybe they suddenly checked their phone. Maybe they pretended to be interested in a wall that clearly wasn't that fascinating 5 seconds earlier. Your first thought was probably, do I have something on my face? Most of us assume the worst, because insecurity trains the mind to search for flaws. But here's another possibility. What if they weren't staring because something looked wrong? What if they were staring because something about you quietly caught their attention? Human beings naturally look toward whatever awakens curiosity. The funny part is that once we realize we've been caught looking, self-consciousness takes over almost instantly. That's why people suddenly look away. Not because they dislike what they see, but because they've become aware of their own attention. Jung would probably smile at this, because it reflects one of his most fascinating ideas: projection. We don't simply see other people as they are. We unconsciously project our own hopes, fears, longings, and hidden potential onto them. Sometimes a person's calmness reminds us of the peace we've been searching for. Sometimes another person's confidence awakens the courage we've buried beneath years of self-doubt. Sometimes someone's kindness reminds us of the softer side of ourselves we've forgotten. We think we're reacting to another person, but often we're reacting to something they awaken inside us. That's why attraction can feel so difficult to explain. You hear people say, I don't know what it is about them. Exactly. They don't know because the unconscious is doing the talking before logic has a chance to catch up. Think about the people who naturally attract attention without trying. They usually aren't the loudest person in the room. They're not constantly checking whether everyone is watching them. In fact, many of them seem surprisingly relaxed. That's because genuine confidence doesn't demand attention. It simply exists. In a world where so many people are performing, authenticity becomes incredibly noticeable. Imagine 2 people entering the same room. One desperately tries to impress everyone they meet. The other simply smiles, speaks honestly, and feels comfortable being themselves. Which one do you think people remember? More often than not, it's the second person. Why? Because emotional security is rare, and rare things naturally capture attention. Here's another clue. Have you ever noticed someone suddenly acting a little differently around you? They start fixing their hair. They straighten their shirt. Their voice changes slightly. They laugh a little more than usual or become strangely quiet. It's almost as if their brain has forgotten how to behave normally. We've all seen it happen. Attraction doesn't just change emotions. It changes behavior. Before anyone says, I like you, their body is often revealing it in dozens of tiny ways. The fascinating part is that the person causing those reactions usually has no idea. They assume everyone behaves like that, but they don't. Emotional significance quietly changes the nervous system, and the body often tells the truth before words ever do. Now let's move to the second sign, because this one is even more revealing. People remember the smallest things about you, not the obvious things, the little things. You casually mention your favorite coffee one afternoon, and 3 months later, someone asks if it's still your favorite. You tell a funny childhood story once, then forget about it completely. Weeks later, someone brings it up word for word. They remember your birthday even though you only mentioned it in passing. They ask about a goal you shared months ago. At first you think, wow, they have a really good memory. Maybe they do. But memory doesn't work the way most people think it does. We hear thousands of things every week, yet we remember only a tiny percentage. Why? Because the mind holds on to what carries emotional weight. Jung understood that emotionally meaningful experiences sink much deeper into the unconscious than ordinary information. That's why certain people stay in our thoughts long after everyone else has faded into the background. They didn't necessarily say anything extraordinary. They simply made us feel something. Maybe they listened without interrupting. Maybe they laughed with us instead of at us. Maybe they looked genuinely interested while everyone else seemed distracted. Those moments leave emotional fingerprints, and once the unconscious connects a positive feeling to a person, curiosity naturally follows. We begin noticing little details about them without even trying. Here's something worth thinking about. Attraction is really another form of attention. When someone becomes emotionally significant to us, we start observing them more closely. We notice their habits. We remember their favorite songs. We recognize changes in their mood before anyone else does, not because we're forcing ourselves to pay attention, but because the unconscious has already decided that this person matters. That's why someone may forget what they ate yesterday, but remember a random joke you told 6 months ago. Logic can't always explain it, but emotion can. And maybe that's the biggest misunderstanding about attraction. People believe it's only about being noticed. It isn't. It's about being remembered. Plenty of people get attention for a moment. Very few leave an emotional impression that quietly follows someone home. If people consistently remember the little things about you, don't dismiss it too quickly. It often means your presence reached deeper than the conversation itself. Before we continue to the final 2 signs, take a moment to subscribe to Deep Psyche. We explore the hidden ideas of Carl Jung and the fascinating psychology behind human behavior, helping you understand not only other people but yourself as well. Because sometimes the greatest discovery isn't learning who others are. It's finally recognizing who you've been all along. Now here's where things become even more interesting, because the 3rd sign doesn't usually look like attraction at all. In fact, most people completely miss it. They assume attraction always shows itself through compliments, flirting, or obvious attention. But sometimes it appears in a much quieter way. People begin telling you things they normally keep hidden. Have you ever met someone who within 15 minutes was sharing stories about their childhood, their fears, their biggest regrets, or the dream they've never told anyone else? And afterward, you're left thinking, why did they tell me all of that? It almost feels random. But psychology suggests it isn't. Human beings reveal themselves only when they feel emotionally safe. That's a much bigger deal than most people realize because genuine emotional safety has become incredibly rare. Everyone is protecting an image. Everyone is trying to appear successful, confident, or unaffected. Jung called this the persona, the social mask we wear to function in the world. The persona isn't evil, it's necessary. But when it becomes the only face we ever show, we slowly lose contact with who we really are. Then one day we meet someone whose presence quietly tells us, you don't have to perform here. Without realizing why, we begin lowering the mask. Think about your own life for a moment. Who are the people you trust the most? Chances are they aren't the loudest, the funniest, or the most impressive people you've ever met. They're the ones who made you feel heard, the ones who didn't rush to judge you or interrupt your story, the ones who looked at you with genuine curiosity instead of waiting for their turn to speak. That's what emotional presence does. It creates space, and people are starving for that kind of space. That's why strangers sometimes open up to you in a taxi, on a train, at work, or while waiting in line. They may even laugh afterward and say, I don't know why I told you all of that, but there's always a reason. Something about your energy made their nervous system relax. They felt understood before you even offered advice. Jung believed every human being carries a shadow, the hidden part of ourselves containing everything we've rejected, feared, or pushed out of awareness. Most people spend years protecting that hidden world because they're afraid that if anyone truly saw it, they would be rejected. But occasionally, we meet someone who doesn't make us feel ashamed of our imperfections. Their acceptance gives us permission to stop pretending. That's why emotional safety is one of the deepest forms of attraction. Beauty may catch someone's attention for a few seconds, but acceptance stays in the heart for years. People forget perfect faces. They rarely forget the person who made them feel safe enough to be completely honest. Now, let's move to the 4th and final sign, because once you notice this, you'll start seeing it everywhere. People behave differently when you're around. Some suddenly become funnier, almost like they're trying to entertain you without realizing it. Others become strangely nervous. They lose their train of thought, stumble over simple words, or repeat themselves because they're suddenly aware of how they're being perceived. And then there are the people who become unusually kind. They offer help you never asked for. They smile more often. They find reasons to continue conversations that should have ended 5 minutes ago. It's fascinating because attraction doesn't simply create emotion, it changes behavior. Before the mind finds the right words, the body has already begun responding. But here's something most people never talk about. Not every reaction to attractive energy is positive. Sometimes your presence makes certain people uncomfortable, and it has nothing to do with anything you've done wrong. Jung spent much of his life explaining that other people often act as mirrors for parts of ourselves we haven't fully accepted. Imagine meeting someone who carries the confidence you've always wished you had, or someone who remains calm in situations that would overwhelm you. Without realizing it, your unconscious begins comparing your inner world to theirs. For some people, that's inspiring. For others, it's intimidating. The same quality that attracts one person may trigger insecurity in another. This is why genuinely authentic people occasionally experience unexpected jealousy or criticism. Their presence quietly reminds others of possibilities they've ignored within themselves. This is also why chasing universal approval is one of the fastest ways to lose your natural magnetism. The moment your happiness depends entirely on everyone else's opinion, your attention shifts away from who you are and toward who you think people want you to become. Jung called the journey back to ourselves individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole instead of merely accepted. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming real. And real people are surprisingly attractive because they give everyone else permission to stop pretending too. They don't need to dominate every conversation or prove they're the smartest person in the room. They simply show up as themselves, flaws included. Ironically, that's what makes them unforgettable. Here's a question worth asking yourself. When was the last time you remembered someone because they looked perfect? Probably not very often, but you probably remember someone who believed in you when you were doubting yourself, someone who listened when nobody else had time, someone who laughed with genuine joy, someone whose calm presence made a difficult day feel a little easier. Those are the people who remain in our hearts because the unconscious remembers feelings far longer than appearances. That is the kind of attraction Jung invites us to understand. Not attraction built on performance, but attraction born from authenticity. And maybe that's the greatest irony of all. The people who possess this kind of quiet magnetism usually don't recognize it. They spend years focusing on everything they think they lack, while completely overlooking the qualities that make them unfit.